Hi, welcome to Consciously Unbiased LinkedIn Live. I'm super excited today. We're going to talk about how you sustain the movement of Black Lives Matters. This is actually like the largest group of people we've had on a session before, so I'm really excited to see how it goes. Consciously Unbiased, I'm the founder, my name is Ashish Kaushal. I'm the founder of Consciously Unbiased and Higher Talent. Higher Talent's the diversity staffing firm, and then Consciously Unbiased has really sort of tried to amplify voices and impact makers that tap into the power of community of change, and then really sort of push the envelope on how do you rethink diversity in the workplace so that we can actually make it more inclusive. Today's special guests are Kaylee Scales. She's principal of Think Free Global Strategies, former managing director of Black Lives Matter Global Network. Christina Singletary, global diversity and inclusion manager at Verizon Media. Dr. Akila Kadei, founder and CEO of Change Kadei. And then Dimitri Moise, I hope I said that correctly, co-founder and vice president at Hammerspace Now, and Taiyo Rockson, CEO of UID Management, author of Use Your Difference to Make a Difference. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Hey. Definitely. So Kaylee, I'd love for you to start. Can you tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a personal story about how social unrest this summer impacted you personally?
Yes, so my name is Kylie Scales. I'm the principal of Think Free Global Strategies, which is a boutique firm which focuses on working with organizations and individuals in helping folks to achieve their transformative goals. I started that, I've been the principal of Think Free Global Strategies since the end of my tenure with Black Lives Matter Global Network this past summer in July. My heart is always with the movement. I'm in full support of the movement, and I first want to thank you for bringing this really incredible group of people together to really talk about how this movement will move forward in the world. And I see that. I'm very confident that what I've seen over the summer with different organizations, individuals, and everyone sort of rallying together in this coalition will bode well for the future. And I believe that we will be successful.
Thank you. Welcome. And Christy, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Singletary. I'm a global diversity and inclusion manager at Verizon Media. So I focus a lot on our education awareness program, a lot of our training, leadership development opportunities. And I'm excited to be here today to really continue the conversation on how we are going to move forward. This summer was interesting when the social unrest occurred. It was a lot of, when the murder of George Floyd, I'll go ahead and say it, it was a lot that hit me at once. One, because we were in a pandemic. So we were at home. We didn't have any social distractions or anything to kind of lure us away from what was going on. It was a very concentrated effort. Everybody's eyes were on the screen. So I think it was the first time we actually had to process what occurs on a very normal day-to-day and actually sit with it and feel what it feels to us. So with the opportunity for us to really examine how that has affected the community for numerous years and now actually taking action to move forward with it, I'm glad that we're still having and servicing these conversations.
Absolutely. Great points. Dimitri, would you like to go next?
Sure. It is an honor to be here, and I can't thank y'all enough. This is going to be an incredible conversation. My name is Dimitri Moise. I consider myself a lifelong activist. I went to college on an activism scholarship. I studied drama, so that led me into becoming a storyteller on Broadway and on television. In my time as an actor, I experienced a lot of microaggressions, a lot of overt, covert racism, which was really affecting to my career. And I ended up really making a big shift after the 2016 election and focusing back on my activism. And these days I help consult nonprofits on how to build intentional inclusion in the workplace. And that has led me really to this summer where post the murder of George Floyd, one of my colleagues on one of the shows that I worked on reached out and said, you know, I am tired of yelling in this social media void and I just want to do something. And something in me decided, you know, to call you because I want to make tangible change. And for me, one of the things that as someone who is gay and non-binary, it's really disheartening to see a sharp rise in the murders of Black trans people and seeing no coverage, no stories, no one is fighting for all Black lives. And that is what led us to create Claim Our Space Now, which is an organization that is emboldening urgent action to dismantle white supremacy and save all Black lives. And we're a nonprofit organization that is focused on civic engagement, empowerment, and direct impact in Black and Brown communities nationwide. And our three tenets are to inform, inspire, and speak truth to power, as we really want to make the change that we wish to see here, now that all eyes are on this movement.
Yeah, no, interesting point you brought up, because I do think that most people don't realize that Black transgenders have the highest incident rate of violence, and I think that's something that we definitely have to address. Taiyo, let's hear about you too.
Hi, so my name is Taiyo Rockson, and I'm listening to each of you talk, and it's interesting because I find myself going back to where I was in each of those moments that were happening, and for me, before I even go into the personal story, what I do is I run a global firm which focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my job is to be a consultant and strategist where I work with people on multiple different intersections, identity, cultural competency, as well as hiring, recruiting, and sourcing from a more inclusive lens. And I got into the field because personally, I've been Black on 4 continents. I'm Nigerian, but my dad was a diplomat, so we grew up everywhere. And a lot of those experiences were things that I experienced initially. The microaggressions that I had were things that ended up shaping a lot of my life and got me down the path of being a writer in addition to being a practitioner. And I've been covering a lot of these stories from a globalized lens. And so when the summer came about, I found myself doing a lot of what you were talking about, Christy. It was a lot at once, but I found myself in this position of constant barrages of DMs, right? How can I not be racist to you? And, and then you go through that spectrum of being insulted to like, finally. And then I had a lot of the, people want you be on a panel, people need you have all these things. So I was carrying a lot of emotional labor. I was re-experiencing a lot of traumatic experiences I personally had. And I was having those re-experiences occur as I was watching what was happening in the world. So it was an interesting thing for me to learn how to work through my personal traumas while observing the collective traumas as well as the generational traumas that have created what happened. So trauma inception, if you will. So that was my that was my summer. But I think with a lot of uncomfortable truths come potential for solution. So that's where I've been. That's where I am. That's why I'm glad we're having this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Welcome. We're honored to have you guys all. So if you think about Black Lives Matters, 4 years ago, it was about 43% of America supported the movement, and then the rest of them sort of either didn't have a feeling about it or were against it. What do you think changed? And then, for me personally, I'll tell you that I've seen so many clients and people talk about how it's shifted from other people's problems to this shouldn't happen. My friend's Black, my coworker's Black, and I didn't realize this was happening on a scale that it was. So I'd love to get your perspective on what do you think has made the shift besides the obvious things that we see? And then the second thing is, what do you think we have to do to keep this thing going and making sure that it's not just a blip and we forget about it after? Because I think one of the things I've seen in the news cycle is we're not capable of reporting more than one thing at a time. And unfortunately, we have to get past that. But I'd love your perspectives.
I think, if that's okay, if I throw something out there, I think Christy and everyone, the social media, the media we have today, the fact that it's in front of our faces, I think made a lot of people kind of wake up from a fog I think a lot of us have been living in. And we realize now that we have, shared responsibility to end this violence. I do a lot of work as an HIV advocate, particularly for communities of color who are disproportionately affected. And, this year, this World AIDS Day, the theme was a global shared responsibility. And I feel the same when it comes to the movement for the protection of, all Black lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll chime in. I believe a few things. I believe, number one, George Floyd and his brutal murder, in which we all each had to witness a man reunite with the spirit of his dead mother, brought a humanity to what activists and individuals have been saying for decades. And that really struck a chord in all of us. I also believe that the veil between activism and people in general has been lifted, and what we saw out in the streets were our colleagues and our neighbors and our friends and our parents and our grandparents, and that brought a new commitment to moving forward and ensuring that Black lives are valued. It brought a new urgency and a new commitment to solution. Those are the things that I believe.
And I'll add to that. I think, honestly, I feel like we had a global pandemic. I feel like that's very obvious. But when you have a global pandemic, the ripple effect was other pandemics were revealed. I think when the world stops, you get to observe who the systems have protected and who they have, disappointed. And a lot of what happened, even before the summer, was you started to see how the health industry simply wasn't even taking care of Black lives in that instance. You got to see, I'm Nigerian, right? And so it hasn't, thankfully, the African continent hasn't suffered as much with the disease, but the problems that were eliminated were, whoa, we don't have any infrastructure for this. We sort of eliminate this. And there was this fear of what would happen if the pandemic rose. And that type of attitude is what led to a lot of the things we saw with Ahmaud Arbery, with George Floyd and everything, where people started realizing that they do have a responsibility to hold people accountable, that it doesn't just exist in just, hey, I'm going to have a Martin Luther King Day, right? Or you do have students or nephews or nieces who go to school. Sorry, that's New York City.
Is it? I think it's me.
Oh,
sorry.
No. But
Queen.
Essentially, when you're forced to face and look at yourself in the mirror, metaphorically and literally, you start to see things that you have participated in by your inaction. And I think that's what happened. People got uncomfortable with what they did to make that happen. And when you take away a lot of jobs, people are going to go to the streets. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing you brought up that makes sense is the pandemic doesn't discriminate, right? And it's so contagious that if we don't take care of each other, it doesn't matter what color you are, you're going to get it, right? Yeah. So it's sort of forcing us to sort of collaborate at this point, which is the one positive.
Well, yeah, that is a positive.
But I do feel it's important to note that, if you are BIPOC, you have a higher probability of contracting COVID, just due to the structural and systemic inequalities in our systems and our various different structures. Public transportation, BIPOC. Grocery store, BIPOC. Your package being delivered, BIPOC, right? And even those who are on front lines, who may be in more supportive roles in healthcare, they're around and there too. Not all BIPOC people have the privilege of working home, right? We're working remotely and minimizing exposure. And that's due to now we celebrate essential workers, but we've had essential workers for a very long time. And it goes all the way back, unfortunately, to the history of America with the enslavement of Black people. And so it's the pattern that continues over and over again. So as someone who has an invisible disability, I've known how horrible healthcare has been because I'm an educated Black woman who's discriminated against, right? And so just think again about that same person who maybe are an essential worker as a BIPOC person, maybe they are working remotely in a Zoom space and through some type of activity contracted COVID, they're going into a space where their life is less valued. So they leave with a bladder infection and then they die 2 days later in an ambulance because they had COVID and they were not tested, right? And so these inequalities that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic are further opportunities to improve overall social determinants of health of Black people, in America. I'm biased because I'm Black, but helping Black people helps other communities of color as well. Hi, everyone. Akila.
Hey.
I, am dismantling white supremacy. So I had a conflict and Ash was like, come when you can come. So here I am. I'm excited about all of you to see you again. Hi.
Well, I was saying this is the first time we've had so many people on one cast. So it's awesome to see.
And by the way, it's such a good point. It's such a good point that you brought up, Kayla, on the pre-existing condition. And sorry, I know I'm a writer, so I'm going to bring up metaphors. So, but the pre-existing condition of America and a lot of the world is a lot of what came to the forefront, right? So when something happens, when you haven't treated those conditions, you become more susceptible to it, or you have to react in different ways. So a lot of times, what you said, someone could have a liver issue, they won't go to the doctor, but something COVID happens, and then it exposes them more and more. A lot of what's been happening in the world is we've been pretending like Black Lives mattered, but it hasn't been the case because of what you said, Dimitri. Look, when you think about Black lives, sometimes it might be looked through a heteronormative lens, for example, right? It might be looked through a visible disability lens, right? It might be looked through a patriarchal lens. All these lenses aren't as intersectional as they could be. And sometimes people think, oh, I worked with this Black man, and that means I did something, or look at the NBA, or look at this. And we forget to actually do the work to understand where the intersection exists. Because if you don't treat people, humanize people, by the way, it becomes easy for you to try and have those shortcuts. This person fit the quota, or this person did that. But if you humanize someone, you then are very aware of the multiple identities and multiple intersections that exist there. And you pay more attention. And we just haven't paid attention, or we haven't cared to pay attention. Both true.
Right, absolutely. And I would love to add on to that. It's interesting because we always can it started with the pandemic, and then it just tapered down. So we had the opportunity to see data on the screens where we saw the numbers of Black and people of color suffering from COVID more than others. We had the opportunity to see a murder on televised. We had the opportunity to really see, we couldn't run away from it and only identify with our own truths. So everyone had to actually see what was really going on, and you couldn't run from what we were actually what was perpetuated on media, as well as in what we were reading, what we were seeing. So there was no way to run around with the true issues and where we have fallen short and how we have been a disservice to some communities, because we think that we have tossed policies and have done different things to try to remediate this. But really, when you have human bias in a way of just really implementing it for this to be successful, we weren't really servicing who we needed to serve. So now we actually recognize and see that there are a lot of problem areas in the way that we have businesses, how we conduct, how our health services. We're seeing some of those broken pieces, and we can't ignore it anymore. So it's now have to move forward.
Yeah, I think that as a society, we really lost our touch to what I think I call radical empathy, and this has really, like you said, Taiyo, humanizing people is, I think, one of the ways that we get back to our ability to be empathetic. I think of people who are living with HIV who are treated like a statistic, a part of the healthcare system. But we are human too, and we have full lives, and it's important for healthcare workers, for Black communities, but for all people that they're serving, to not just think of them as a patient inside the four walls of their doctor's office, but what are you thinking about in terms of the care outside the office as well? How do we show empathy not just inside the workplace, but outside the workplace as well? We're full people who come to these siloed places, not just as a part of a person, but as a whole person. And how can we do the part to really honor the wholeness of people who are coming into these rooms?
No, absolutely. And we have to break the bias. Like, think about like, for example, we say statistically Black men are more violent than white men, right? But if you take it, like I always say, statistics can always paint the picture the way you want it to be, right? And so if we literally change we flip the numbers from everything that's a percentage to an actual value, and everything that's an actual value to a percentage, I guarantee you'll find it's the other direction, and so I think we just have to start looking at things objectively. And so, in terms of how do you keep this movement going and make sure that this isn't just a period in time that we feel bad and then we walk away from it? I mean, what do you think people need to do to keep this going, to actually make change happen?
I mean, I think one of the things, like it's easy to say we can't let up on the gas, like we have to stay engaged. But I think everyone is so fatigued by Zoom, fatigued by the movement, fatigued by the election. And I think one of the things that we can maybe focus on is the locality of these issues too. Like as much as they are national, these are local issues. I think about the fact that in New York City here, we have a 2021 election and a lot of 2/3 of city council are up for re-election. And we can't think about, oh, I'm so tired from this 2020 election because we have another one right around the corner. Mm-hmm. And I think the same goes for this movement. These are local issues and we need to talk about these issues and always be stepping up for these communities and not stay complicit.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on what you're saying there, and I'll add grassroots and intentionality. And grassroots doesn't even just have to be politics. I'm talking about, like you said, your local environment. If you want to change the world, that starts right in your backyard, above your shoulders and between your ears, right? It doesn't always end anywhere else. So as this summer has brought a lot of reflection for a lot of people, there are multiple avenues for change. And my hope is that as people are starting to see that Black Lives Matter isn't just a slogan, or it is something that infiltrates every single system we have. What can you own and intentionally keep pressure on? Whether it's with reorganizing your curriculums. I'm Nigerian. One of the things that I learned quickly when I first came here is a lot of Black history isn't taught from anything that it's outside of colonization or enslavement, which is a very interesting way to dehumanize a whole group of people. But if you don't start there, which is what I mean by grassroots, what's the next generation going to do if they don't know how to attribute the appropriate contributions to that? In your workplace, how can we get more multiple identities involved, right? All the standards and norms, anything from hair policy to whatever, to holidays, to any of these things, to having those type of things. How does that work with your policies? How are you partnering with people and funding people that could help with your pipeline and all these things? So that there's when this question is asked for me, there's always something to do, even before the summer. It's just a matter of you have to be intentional and say, I'm going to continue to do this without the outside pressure or the performative need to seem like you're virtual signaling. Just do the work. It's there. It's everywhere. We saw it today, and we saw it in the summer. So, yeah.
And I'll add two other pieces to that. Number one, I think this is a time for coalition building. This is a time for engaging in what a lot of the other panelists have said about intersectionality and understanding what's happening from grass tops to grassroots, and really making sure that we are keeping our eyes and our ears and our hearts open to the full entire needs of our community, and having hard conversations and bringing the right people to the table. So that's number one. The second thing I think is this is a time to really be introspective about distribution of power. Who has it, who needs it. So really being deliberate about how power is distributed when we're doing our work, when we're thinking of our solutions, when we're bringing those people to the table. And this can manifest itself in many ways. For example, in a corporate environment, many corporations are interested in providing resources to organizations and trying to help organizations. It's very important to empower staff to be able to help make some of those decisions. There are staff members who have strong connections to local organizations and have been doing local work, and having staff members as part of the decision-making process in order to distribute resources equitably and democratically are things that we can and all should be thinking about in this moment as we move forward.
I agree, and I think you brought up a good point about the staff part, because I think, look, you see a lot of organizations that are publicly donating to different causes, right? But that needs to be done. You also have to invest dollars into changing your culture internally, right? And it's not just say, hey, can you come talk to me for free and do this? Because I think the commitment to that shows that you're actually really wanting to make a change in the organization.
Yeah, I think that's the real difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism. One of the things that looking outward versus turning inward. And one of the things I definitely say when I approach a client is, there are so many amazing organizations that focus on anti-racism. I don't do that. And you need to do that as well as what we're going to be working on when it comes to DEI, because like you said, Ashish, it's really important for companies to turn inward as well as what they're doing externally.
Kayla, what are your thoughts?
The summer of allyship did not work. We had a litmus test of where racism stands in America through this last election. So we know 70+ million people are racist. How do I know they're racist? They're like, you know what's okay? Let's just keep the racism that's happening. Let's keep kids in cages. Let's keep inequities with COVID going. Let's stay in a recession. Let's make sure women don't have rights. So there's a lot of the isms people were okay with. So when there's an opportunity to get back to the focus of humanity, people chose otherwise. That's why I'm saying the summer of allyship didn't work, because of this litmus test. The work that we do as a diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and anti-racism firm is we take our approach centered in belonging. Belonging is easier to understand. So sometimes even just saying, oh, we have a diversity initiative, the cis white guy is like, well, that's not me. Or, he doesn't have any kids. I'm not a parent. So I'm not going to do anything. And these are the individuals that have the most power in organizations. White people are the dominant culture of America. White people are the dominant culture for most companies. That's just how it is. And so we take the approach of focusing on belonging to make sure everyone can feel valued and appreciated. Everyone can learn and unlearn. Everyone can have conversation, regardless if it's liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, because that's come up so much. They're like, but we're not political. Humanity is not about politics. But we go into how can we get to the place where people can be valued and respected, held at the same regard, so that one white guy that did that one thing that one time isn't excluded from the harassment or discrimination or misogyny or whatever is coming up, to the place of we want to make sure we have individuals here, regardless of how they identify, present, practice their identity, that they know that they are going to be supported irregardless of whatever's happening at work. Everyone is held to the same regard. There's multiple opportunities for feedback. Now, I believe, some of you may not agree, that white people have to get their shit together. And why am I saying that? Is because they have the most power. So allyship is an important thing that has to continue the efforts of BLM because of where they are, their proximity. With all the privilege I have, all the power that I have, I'm a doc, I run my business, I'm working with big ass companies and stuff. I'm still not white. Even with my light skin privilege, I'm still not white. So that white woman or that white guy really has to shape and change the culture. And the important thing to note is what happens in the workplace also happens at home. Your feelings on being racist, anti-racist, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, it's personal. And so we need individuals who are, yes, practicing in the workplace, but also at home too, in their family structures, their dynamics, to shift the conversation, hold people accountable, and start to use their privilege they have, the additional privilege because of how America's set up, for good, so that we don't always have to carry the work. I'm tired. I am tired. I'll let you know that I'm tired. But the alternative to me not doing this work is further being oppressed, or major depression disorder that I have for being in 9-to-5 spaces. So I have no choice but to fight. So the last thing I'll say is that for white people in their journey of allyship or becoming an accomplice, we do the same shit. We advocate for ourselves, we learn and unlearn, we make mistakes and grow from them from being in white dominant spaces. We're asking them to do the same so that we all can get to this true place of equality. We want to be Black dominant culture. We want to be equal too, so that we all have the same comfy beanbag chair of white comfort. That's it.
I love that. So many great points.
Yeah, I love what you said, Akila. I love everything that you said, especially the accountability piece, because I do think that, we wanted to, what I noticed when there was a lot of energy going around, like, how can we solve this and end racism, within 2 weeks? Like, we need to end this right away. But reality is this has occurred over 400 years, and we have a long ways to go. And so understanding what can we do to understand that history of how we got to the way we are now, and recognizing why are we in this position, understanding the why. And then before jumping into wanting to save, you really just understand how we got here in the first place. So take an evaluation of different processes and policies, looking at it from a corporation standpoint, really evaluating where there could be different adverse bias that exists. How are you hiring people? How are you creating the weighted system? How are you promoting? What are you evaluating people on? How are you comparing them to their peers? Do you have a harder grading scale for one than the other? Really understand within a corporation to really identify and help Black people move forward. So it's understanding is really that accountability piece that is really going to make that shift and keep it moving forward. So it's really not the work of how much you can perform and do all these grand gestures, but it's also in evaluating, taking responsibility of how the way things were, evaluate it, assess it, and change it.
Yeah. If you create an environment of belonging, right, and you take down the barriers of discrimination, what you end up doing is you're unleashing productivity in your organization, right? Because ultimately, if I'm not stressed about how you look at me and I'm not stressed about how I'm being treated, I'm going to be more focused on what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And be more productive and less sick as well.
Absolutely. You want to feel valued. You want to provide your contributions. You come to an organization to show who you are, and you want to demonstrate that quality. And if you feel like you don't feel a part of something, you're not going to produce as much. Engagement is tied to performance, and performance is tied to the bottom line. So if you understand that if you really focus on an engagement piece and really create an environment where people feel as if they belong and add value, you will really see an increase in your bottom line as success of your organization.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's we should be thinking about augmenting too is once that space and belonging is created, what is the pipeline that follows to the next generation? I think about the work that I do in communities where you realize that it's not because I'm Black I can't have XYZ. It's because this community doesn't have the access. This community isn't told where to go. There are communities who don't know that in 2021, New York will be doing ranked choice voting for the first time. So when people step into that voting booth, they're going to look at it and say, what is going on? So I think, what is that pipeline we're creating to ensure that people who are coming after us will also gain that access, will also be able to not have to live in a world that is so focused on meritocracy and the titles that come after our names? How are we, really building that pipeline for the communities coming after us?
I think that there needs to be a distinction between hobbies and lifestyles. I think a lot of people took this summer as a hobby. I'm an anti-racist as a hobby, and when something is a hobby, you do it once in a while, right? I like reading and like going here, but then something gets in the way. Your hobbies sort of go down the line. But if it's a lifestyle, it's top of mind, right? If you think about even any of these sales, people that are participating in sneaker culture, any of these things, you are doing the work. I want to find that exclusive brand. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to talk to every single person, even if I wasn't there. That's what makes you a sneakerhead. Same thing for comics or anything you like. And so whenever someone is always asking me about that type of question, what can I do? What can I do? That's the first question. I said, is this a hobby or a lifestyle for you? Because if you haven't made that decision, it doesn't matter what I'm telling you. Now, if you decide to make it a lifestyle, you are going to go through the ends of the world to figure out things to unlearn and boundaries to create. Because some of these boundaries that you need to create are, again, in your backyard. We just had the holiday on Thursday. I don't always acknowledge Thanksgiving, but for the sake of the conversation, we just had a Thanksgiving holiday where many people's families, like you're saying, are part of the problem. And a lot of times, the idea of not wanting to lose privilege overrides your idea to sustain a movement. And if you can't get past that, there's no sustaining the movement on your end. And you actually do more harm than the benefit of that. And I just think there's a reckoning that companies, individuals, and people need to come to, because that's how we move. That's how we advance. And like you were saying, Christy, this thing is going to get to where we want to get to way after we're alive. We'll be, hopefully it's something we're passing the baton on to people. But if you have this thing where you're like, Obama's the president, I'm done. or this person we got this person office, I'm done. You are not going to know what a lifestyle is. It's going to be a hobby for you because it's something that needs to continue. So mindset.
So I want to reiterate, as Black people, this is lifelong work for us, just for opportunities. Sometimes just getting coffee or tea, it's lifelong work, right? And so what I always tell white people is that, you want to brush your teeth, put on your deodorant, and check your privilege, because that's where your opportunity is going to come up. Like, it is a lifestyle, like what you're saying, Taiyo, it's a lifestyle. This is a daily practice. It's a triathlon, not a sprint. There's no end date. This is #full life. This is what you are going to do forever.
Yeah.
You cannot come in and out and have a choice of it. Learning about allyship, you're figuring out your parameters, when to speak up, who you're going to support, how to do it while you're still learning. But when you become an accomplice as someone who fully is understanding and aware of their privilege that they have, and they're looking to dismantle systemic and institutional oppression and racism, then you have to fully commit to it. So for the holiday, the day of gratitude, as I like to call it, for the holiday, you're still having a conversation about what's going on. You can't, I can't get a break from being Black. Impossible, right? And so if you're fully committed as an accomplice, it is part of your daily life. You're having those conversations. You're putting up those boundaries and barriers and saying, hey, grandma, uncle, dad, I can't have this conversation with you. I actually need to remove myself, because the thing that a lot of white people forget is if you continue relationships with people who perpetuate racism, practice racism, oppression, discrimination, whatever it is, they are adding to the problem.
And you're enabling them.
You're enabling them.
Yeah. If you continue a relationship with given permission, that is the other thing that you're doing. Whether you explicitly give it or implicitly give it, you're giving them permission to say that, because that's what happened. People feel bold enough to say certain things, or
you're also giving them the space, and then that makes that gives them the opportunity to say, well, I've done it in this space, I can do it in another one. Oh, I did it in this one too, so I'll do it in the next one.
Which is what you saw with the election, right? Yeah. Again, giving the space and the opportunity to further harm people, women, BIPOC, low income, immigrants, what have you. They gave the space for that. Yeah. I'm glad it went the right way.
I think a lot of people don't look at the whole picture, and they might vote on something just because that one issue is important, not realizing how it affects society. And I think we have to be more mindful of that. So you guys have all kind of given us great ideas here. So I think one thing from a tactical standpoint, what's your one thing that you should do every day to be an ally to make anti-racism contagious?
I always say connect it to your values. So when I'm talking about people being intentional, people are so quick to tell you how good or bad of a person they are, right? So I'm a good person, that person's a bad person. And so what exercise I always do, I always say, hey, tell me what your 5 core values are. Most people won't be able to tell me. What's your 4? What are 4? 3, 2, 1. And then I'm like, okay, so you don't know what your core values are, but you're so sure you're a good person. But yet, if we see a company go down for something morally abject, one of the first things I like to do, I'm a nerd, is I will look at the mission statement. And I haven't found any mission statement that says, I promise to embezzle $20 million and create unsafe environments for BIPOC. So if you are not intentionally doing that, you're going to stray away from the default, which is what? Anti-Blackness. The default is anti-Blackness. So if you say honesty, integrity, all these things are, what is going to happen as you become more intentional about your values is that you are going to start to actually get into a different world. You're like, whoa, that is not integrity. That isn't love. I am trying to look at love from a different perspective. I only think this people should have love. I only think that is. You will be intentionally in places where you are feeling this thing in your heart where like, oh, that just goes against my system. That is the fuel. Now, if you're looking for, Instagram boxes or black boxes or someone to give you direction all the time, you are just going to constantly be reactive as opposed to be proactive. And you're not going to be trained to start seeing people through the lens you claim to have as a good person. So start with know what your 5 core values are, and then fill those value cups every day, not every 2 months, every day. What can I do to fill my compassion lens so I can connect to some other person suffering? That's one of my lenses. What can I do to be courageous today? That's another one of my lenses, right? What can I do to be curious? You will find yourself navigating the world in a different way and a less conditioned way. And then you're gonna watch as those systems start to dismantle. Sorry, I got passionate there. Sorry,
I love that. That's amazing.
I would say that we should make sure to not spend a lot of time thinking about how we are not part of the problem and making it a point to remind ourselves or reassure ourselves or reassure others that we are not part of the problem. We all have to accept that we were all outside when the contaminated rain fell. Everyone is impacted by the remnants of a dominant culture. And we really have to make sure that we, as many of other panelists have said, bring that intentionality into everything that we do and that responsibility into everything that we do, and not waste a lot of time just, avoiding movement forward and avoiding solutions.
I love that. Yeah, definitely. Chrissy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to say, and just to add on, because I love everything that is being said, is to commit to learning, commit to the journey, make this a priority. Understand that you're not going to get it right. It's not going to be perfect, but understand that if you stay along the way and just understand you're fighting for equality and for everyone to be viewed as a human, and understand that we are actually all more connected than we think. And just understand that if we can still press forward and try to get along and see how we can really make that change, that's when we're going to really see it. It's not something that we can just do once and done, and it may have not been successful. Our efforts may not have been recognized, and then you walk away. It's actually something that is going to be a reoccurring thing that we'll need to make sure that we are prioritizing.
So be persistent. And then as Akila says, do the work, which I'm surprised you don't have a shirt saying that.
Yeah, I love that.
Cool. I will just say, become comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that's what everyone needs to do, regardless of how they identify. So speaking up for yourself as a BIPOC person or a Black person, saying that behavior is not okay. And as someone from dominant culture, white or white passing, being able to open and receive that, to use your voice and use the additional power and privilege that they have for good.
I have two micro progressions. I think people can ask themselves, what is one thing I can learn today? And then after you check your privilege, what is one thing I can unlearn today? And really be intentional about that. I don't know if that means writing it down for yourself. I have a lovely dry erase board that I love to write and erase on. That helps me. I've also put Post-it notes around my apartment to be like, these are the things you believe in. So how can you be intentional about those things you're learning and unlearning, and then documenting that so that you can practice it in the future?
Dimitri, I would add to that and say, not only document it, but actually amplify it. Tell people around you that this is what you've done today. And that way you can see, that way they hold you accountable, right? Because part of it is the accountability thing, and I think that's a key part. That the only way we change stuff is if we build habits and create accountability, and somebody calling out when you're not doing it,
Calling in, though, you want to call people in, not out.
Sorry,
get them to action instead of like, you suck and racist. You suck because you're racist, but have you thought of? Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're seeing this, but there's a comment about addressing questions in the comment section.
Yeah. We'll let me, Tevin, do you want to put a few questions up for the audience? We generally do them at the end, but we can bring them in right now so they flow. All right, so it appears the private industry is still unclear how to pivot responsibility, that they really understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. She wants to know what was abundant about Mr. Floyd's murder now appears as acquiescence. Do you agree that the climate change sense of urgency has subsided?
Not for me. I'm busy AF. But I mean, there was like everyone, May 27th through June, 2nd, people were like, oh, I need to do something. So there was a huge demand for my company. I just want to reassure you, Dana, that America is racist. So you're going to have lots of opportunities to continue the work that you're doing. I feel confident saying this against 70+ million people voted for someone who's racist and a white supremacist. So because of that, there's still a lot that has to be corrected from this outgoing administration. And so it's more so if there's a change in what's happening with the interest, you may want to think about how you're presenting yourself and what spaces that you're in, so people know that you're available. Also, feel free to slide in my DMs. I'm happy to talk to you to figure out how I can support you or partner with you. But yeah, no, busy over here.
I think if energy has subsided, it's probably because of the difference between performative and real allyship. As an LGBTQ advocate, one of the things we love to say is Pride is not just in June; it's 365 days a year. And so, it's been very eye-opening to me to suddenly see so many commercials with Black people and all this diversity, and we're showing you that we care. But are you just performing that care, or are you actually taking that time to be a real ally to these communities and not just say, look, we have a commercial with the black trans kid. We did it. Woohoo! That's not enough. So what are you doing in those spaces to make sure that your company is not just performing that allyship, but they really are practicing that allyship daily?
Yeah. And I think part of the essence of what she was asking is, yeah, companies, I think 3 months ago, they were excited about it, right? And everyone's coming in and saying, I want to do this. And is it still there, or is it companies are still doing this, but the employees are saying, do I have to go to this? Am I still into this? I think that's kind of the core of what she's asking.
Yeah. I think the question Dana's trying to ask is whether or not private industry is acquiesced. And it's hard to gauge, Dana, just because there aren't enough things to measure. But if we're going to go off Dr. Kadei's litmus tests, there have been some temperatures, some feelers out there, if you will, to get to see how things are. But it's still way too early to tell, Dana. A lot of these things have to be thought of in tandem, right? The big picture versus grassroots. On my personal side, same thing with Dr. Kadei. I get a lot of requests from private companies who want to continue to do the work, but it would be arrogant of me to think that I'm the the litmus test. But if I'm going off what we all are saying here, if we're all busy, that's a good sign, right? That there is a request for that. But ask me a year from now, Dana. then I'll be able to tell you what the
And going on to that question, I think that brings up another topic we were talking about. Kaylee, you said that we've had to align our intention at this moment and then engage our entire community. So it's not just work, but it's not feeling daunting. So what advice do you have on how do we make it not a task that we feel like we have to do, but that we want to do?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that this is a group effort, that everyone must come to the table with the same intention. Everyone must come to the table recognizing that the work that needs to be done is, as many have said, not just a sprint, but a marathon. I think the last question really alluded to what I've noticed, which is sometimes there's this question mark around what to do. So people are may have all this energy and excitement, and they're really making emotional decisions based on an emotional reaction that they had over the summer, and then it becomes real. So what now? What do we do? How do we move forward? And I think and sometimes that can stymie progress when people are trying to figure it all out. So I think really aligning in the intention of that and really making sure that people define what diversity, equity, inclusion means in their individual institution, understand what goals that they are trying to achieve as an individual institution, understand what they are providing or what their interception of individual systemic and institutional racism means to them and their individual organization. And once that has been clarified, then folks can move forward on making very significant plans that could have midterm, medium-term, long-term solutions, but really just grounding in what we are trying to achieve, how can we achieve it, is what I would recommend as a first step.
It's a great idea. Have some short-term wins as well. If feeds itself.
Absolutely. And also yeah, absolutely. And I can chime in from a corporation, since I do work at Verizon, and I can say that it hasn't stopped with us. We have actually dedicated a task force. We understand that, and we preach and we instill these values where it is in our mission statement, where we value inclusion across employees. We have dedicated a task force to work specifically on issues and to really raise how can we elevate the movement, how can we support the Black lives. Our employee resource groups are empowered enough to hold us accountable too. So we ensure that with having this collective task force and collective group of people from all parts of the business ensures that diversity and inclusion isn't something that just is an extracurricular and it lives and dies in the HR department. Because really, diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't just something extra, it's a way of being. It's the way people are, it's who we are. We're all diverse. We all want to be included. So understanding that it is something that is entrenched within your business rather than something that is just a nice to have on the side has really pushed forward a lot of these actions. And when we have seen the collective group of everyone actually contributing to these, we have been able to see that that need or that desire to shift. So it's just a matter of how the organization is moving forward and doing that. But one thing, we are at Verizon actually committed to ensuring that we are indeed seeing that shift.
So Christy, speaking of that, what are 2 or 3 policies that companies could do quickly to drive equity in the workplace?
One is to evaluate your policies, really taking an opportunity to look at what your policies are looking at. How are you hiring people? How are you promoting? Taking a deep dive into what is already in place, because you can never change what you don't measure and assess. You have to make sure that you know exactly where you currently stand in order to make the pivotal changes that you're looking for. So in order to do that, you need to actually have someone coming in, looking at your engagement scores. How are your employees engaged? Are they enjoying working there? What are your employee resource groups doing? They can be a definite avenue for you to actually make some key decisions on some of your products and how are your services that you're offering, ensuring that it is inclusive. You want to make sure you're looking at your data report. How is your workforce reflective of the community that you're serving? So it takes a lot of starts really identifying where you currently are in order to move where you want to be. So where are the changes? Where are the pitfalls? Where are the pain points that you need to address?
And then measure and reiterate, right, and adjust. So
absolutely.
And one of the things, like New York City passed this law about I can't ask you how much you make, and the idea was to get equal pay for women, right? And reality is create accountability, because if I'm an aggressive man, I might ask for 50,000 more than you might ask for, so just spread the gap further. Instead of saying, look, in our companies, let's make sure there's not a variance of more than 5%. Let's hold ourselves accountable instead of pushing it off to somebody else. Akil, I've been wanting to ask you this question. What are your thoughts on corporate reparations?
Find the unmute. I don't personally think it's necessary, because they didn't create the systemic and institutional problems in America. I think that's something that should be left with the government. Now, if companies want to do things for their Black employees, that's fine. But the majority of the corporations didn't enslave us. So, that is personally how I feel about it. I will say this, though. Any Black person who's doing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, or anti-racism work should be paid for it. It should not be free, because it's informing organizational change, whether it's national or global or both. And so they should be compensated, not attacked on title, not just, yay, you're part of this committee or group. Like, these diversity committees should be paid for the work that they're doing, or whatever they're called.
Great. Taiyo, any thoughts on that as well?
I think reparations should be given to people, especially descendants of the enslaved, for sure. I as a Nigerian, this is not my a conversation that I will be privy to, but I see the benefits of that, because to me, it makes sense. I don't know if you've read the Ta-Nehisi Coates article in the case for reparations. I've always thought it made sense. I would think if you take away from a lot of people and generationally disempower them, you need to do the other thing and make it right by empowering them. Now with companies, it's a lot trickier, because the owners are different, the people that are empowered are different. So what I would actually lean more towards is a lot of what you were saying, Christy, is actually making sure that you are intentional about how you include DEI, B, and anti-racism into every single infrastructure that gets people in there, so that you have a better corporate culture. Because once the culture changes, a lot of things can happen from there. And the more you empower people and keep them accountable, the more sustainable it is. So while I am for reparations as a whole from the government, I think it's very hard to regulate with companies, and I actually think it's a lot easier on the government side, and then they can determine how to do that, and they should do it actually.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. There's necessarily has to be done inside companies, but what I do think companies can do is, one is make space and opportunities for people, right? And then number two is make sure everyone's like paid equally for the opportunity. And as Keila said, if you're asking me to do extra work to help the culture, make sure there's some sort of conversation for it.
Yeah,
you bring up a really great point, because I just have a few minutes. I think of ourselves as a nonprofit, and reparations don't have to just be financial. There can be in-kind reparations that you do as a company as well. What is the access you're providing in that infrastructure you're creating? How are you really addressing the needs of your constituents? One of the things that we do at Claim Our Space Now is we have a specific accessibility committee, because we are committed to empowering the lives of all Black lives. That includes Black disabled lives. How are we being accessible to these constituents, the communities that we're really trying to serve? So reparations doesn't only have to be with money. It can look and be shaped in different ways.
Yeah. And the bunch of other things too, even if it's the money side, the loan forgiveness, and all these other things, but it's about creating opportunity. that is the actual thing there. I think a lot of people think about it through a black and white lens. What I wanted, I know we're getting ready to close. It's something that I want to be very firm with. Companies need to take a stand. Okay, so I am a very big proponent of nuance. I believe it helps in many things, but there's a moment, and there are moments rather, where a stand is needed to be taken black and white. Human rights versus every other thing else. This doesn't include your political party or any other things. You can see something and understand something, and you have to have that courage and conviction to take that stand. There's one thing to write statements about how appalling you find something there, but if you want to be truly an advocate, you have to be willing to lose friends. And a lot of those friends that you've claimed to have are part of the problem. And so if companies want to be part of advancing the movement, you have to look no further than history. It wasn't that long ago we had segregated bathrooms. It wasn't that long ago we had, homophobic jokes in our movies, which were PG-13, right? And they were seen as normal. It wasn't that long ago all these things were normalized. So if anyone thinks it's okay to just say, we're done now, there's always something to be reflected, refreshed, and advanced. And it's okay to take a stand and be okay losing whatever partners don't agree with you on, because you are dehumanizing folks. That's all I wanted to say.
That's a great point. If you guys are okay, I want to run over for a few minutes, because I think this is an important question.
I'm going to have to go. I have a hard stop.
Yeah, I have a hard stop at one too.
I do too.
Yeah.
In one word, what do you think the government policy should do to combat systemic inequity? We have an option.
The government?
Yeah. What policies do you think they should put in with this new administration?
I think they can create laws. Okay, I feel like a lot of our government, a lot of the laws are created on the system of like an honor code that people will just like be good to each other. We proved very wrong that. So how do we create laws that hold us accountable and are not just based on this honor system that we will say we will adhere to?
Anyone else?
There's so much that's there that I wouldn't even want to put into one word. I will say this: maybe follow the policies that are already there. maybe that as a start, and then going from it.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll do another session on this topic if you guys are open to it. Yeah, this was amazing, guys, and such a great conversation. We're so honored to have you guys here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep being
Thank you so
amazing,
much.
everyone.